click that button and we are going. We are streaming. We are live on YouTube. So what did you just ask us, Cesar?
I said, y'all have any notes so far?
I so we're gonna go over. Oh, wrong button. Section
I should say what
A.
section. We're in
Yeah.
section 2, interiority and economy.
Section A. So section 2 or chapter 2 or whatever the hell it is. Interiority and economy. Section A, which starts on, is it 109? Yep. Separation as life. I think he's almost doubling down on like separation and the other and otherness being like the conditions of possibility for the self. And then he's getting into interiority with this notion of enjoyment. So for me, it's been, I guess, kind of confirmation of, I guess, what we've read before, as far as separation being the thing that kind of gives life and body to the subject or the self or the I. And then he starts to describe interiority because I think he didn't really give it too much description previously. Maybe. Although I think he probably definitely did. But like enjoyment as this like human capacity, he's filling it out and kind of like driving interiority home. Like before, I think it might have been easy to just, I don't know, hand wave it away or be like, what is this? Or like, why do I care or whatever. And I think maybe here he's like explaining, no, this, you do care. And let me explain to you that you already care. And he's trying to like, I don't know, it's difficult. This again, it's another one of those things that like the language is a little slippery. Because it's almost like he's positing his presuppositions and then like holding our hand as we walk down the beach. And he's like, see, look at this beach. Is like this beach is here. And that's why it's here. But you can't deny that it is in fact here. I don't know.
I have a question, and I'm also like doing an internet search of it. I I haven't understood the difference or even like the basic definition of interiority and exteriority, um, how they're being used. So if either of you have some starting ideas of what those two words are.
So interiority or ipseity is the self same, the subject, the I, the cogito. Like there's all these words that kind of point to what I think I like to call subjectivity or like the subject. He calls it the self same. And exteriority is everything else. So it's separation. It's the other, or I don't know. The other is in what is exterior. So it's not to say that like exteriority is the other or like radical alterity, but like the other and radical alterity exists in the exterior. Um so yeah, like
Uh, could I read you what just a quick little AI search says? It's like aggregated a few different sources. Who knows how simplified these might be, but it says exteriority is about the encounter with the other, big O other. Levinas emphasizes that true ethical relations arise from this encounter, where the self is confronted with the face of the other. This face-to-face interaction transcends mere perception and involves a profound ethical responsibility. Exteriority is characterized by the recognition of the other's infinite and irreducible nature, which cannot be fully comprehended or assimilated into the self's interiority. So I wonder how much of that's already borrowing from the later half of the book. Maybe where he kind of gets to some stronger conclusions on these things. But yeah, I just wonder what you guys think of that, what what I just read.
yeah, um I don't think it's wrong, but yeah, I don't think it's in what we've read up to this point.
Yeah, for me, interiority, like if I was to explain it to somebody who like never read Levinas before, I would just say you, like Nance was saying, the self, your consciousness in a sense, and everything that comes with it. And then exteriority is literally everything else that's outside you. So it's like the self is located interior. Like, yes, we have bodies and things in that capacity, and I don't think Levinas is denying that, but it's just more like how we interact with the world is from all the sense data and everything else that goes into the interiority, and then everything else is outside. So just inside versus outside would be like my Spark Notes version, I guess.
Yeah, I think he even like the body can be this like transcendental thing because there's like things to do with the body that are in the exterior. Um but you are in your body, and so like your interiority is like located in your body. So in a sense your body is part of interiority, or like your
Okay.
response to your body is interiority, and then your body itself and its maybe autonomous reactions are kind of more connected to the exterior, and like the sensorium, um like the I don't know, like I guess the autonomous part of it has more to do with
Mm-hmm.
the exterior, but then like the emotional content and like the subjective content is what kind of takes place in the interior.
Would
um
you say that, like, oh, sorry.
I was like, so like enjoyment that we're going to get into is this interior thing that is in response to exterior kind of stimulus or input.
So it's a
It's an
relation.
interior experience of me being able to put my lips on this,
Yeah.
but you guys can't can't experience it the way I'm experiencing it in my interiority.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I think the two come together when we have the experience of like the face and the other. I think that's
Mm.
why it's like an essay on exteriority. because it's like when I'm called into that ethical relation with you, I have to realize like Cesar is having that internal experience with the coffee cup, and he's just as human as I am, and therefore I shouldn't treat him lesser.
Yeah, you realize other people have interiority as well. So, the world of objects, like everything is kind of two-dimensional, or flat or whatever. But then when you encounter the other, you realize, oh, this other has interiority as well. They are human. They are like me in this way. They have this capacity to have interior content, which sets people apart from trees and desks. And then, I mean, we could go back to that conversation we had about like, we have to build a hierarchy for humans and octopus and dolphins and puppies. Like, they're definitely on that scale somewhere, but like first and foremost, the human is properly the other. And we can't go live with dolphins and participate in their community in the same way as we can participate in human community. Although it would be the shit to live with dolphins in the ocean, except I don't like the ocean, but I could probably get over it.
Scary.
Yeah, I could probably get over it if there were some cool dolphin homies.
Every
think
time I see a
dolphins
dolphin
kind of
too,
violent.
I'm not in a bad mood. Yeah, they like rape people.
Yeah, they're rapers, dude.
If Spike TV is a credible source.
Dude, no, they're rapers. They're perverted rapers. Dolphins are.
But so are people.
Yeah, this is true. This is actually true. And because dolphins don't have the ability to like recognize the face of the other, it's less of an ethical tragedy when a dolphin rapes another dolphin. But also like that's like it's not transgressive in the same way. Like they're still doing the physical act, but the ethical content isn't there because it's not like there's a dolphin subject who is aware of what he's doing or they're doing to the other dolphin subject, and they can't have that face-to-face encounter in the same way that humans can have. So dolphins can't feel shame and guilt. So is it rape when dolphins do it? No, it's something else.
It's something else.
Yeah.
But
not in the same category of rape.
Yeah.
Like we would call it rape just because it's like most like Louis C.K. has a joke that like all animal sex is rape.
Yeah.
For the most part.
Sure.
And it's like different. Like if a dog smells another dog in heat and like has its way with it, it's different than like a woman who's ovulating and like somebody's just like,
yeah,
time to strike.
Time to strike. Yeah, dude, that's horrible. Fuck.
Right. Got Colleen Hoover on the brain.
Yeah.
Christopher, did you have any thoughts so far of your independent reading so far of this area?
Yeah, I found like the first couple pages were him bringing up Heidegger and Husserl again and like differentiating, because that's what most philosophers have to do is like, okay, you're going to think I'm talking about it in this context, but I'm kind of not, and this is why these guys are wrong, or at least like not as. So it's like he's saying it's not just us being in the world and care. And he brings that up again later when he's talking about like you using the coffee cup and tasting the sip of it, that enjoyment. Like Heidegger would be like, no, you're just, it's a tool, you're using it to drink so that you can live life. I like the spin Levinas is putting on it. And like when he talks about hammers, like Dave was saying, there's a certain feel to the hammer that you may like. Like everybody on deployment would get pissed at each other because that was a CD, so it was like construction. If somebody like stole the tape measure they liked or the hammer they liked, and you got very possessive over it. because they were Levinasians enjoying how it felt, or it was the proper one for it. It wasn't just that they had to hammer in nails, it would completely change their day. So that really spoke to me. And then just needs, I thought was really interesting. And it's like when you go from, which we've talked about before, like Lacan and like the object, as opposed to like this enjoyment, where it's like you can have enjoyment, you can have that like zest for life, pizzazz, like when you're doing a certain thing that it brings you that enjoyment, as opposed to, I could be wrong, Nance, please correct me if I'm wrong, or Cesar, where it's like there's the transgressive enjoyment of like Lacan, or it's like you're kind of like almost the death drive, where it's like you're doing something that's destructive and you're enjoying it because it's destructive. I like that Levinas is differentiating from that, and it's just writing in his own context, probably not even aware of it. Just like, ooh, I like buttering my bread. And he's the Hobbit. Who's just like, okay, I like sitting down for my tea and it tastes good and I do it a certain way and it brings me that enjoyment. I thought that was just a lot of philosophers live in like a bubble. Like when Kant was Levinas and how much he enjoyed his coffee and stuff, but this guy was writing from a vacuum, and like so was Descartes and all these other guys. And then you have Husserl, who's just like, no, I'm gonna get to the things themselves if I just reduce the phenomenon. And it's like Levinas is like, bitch, you're in a chair you like that's comfortable and you enjoy that shit. And I think it's just cool how unique it is, and to like see the person in the philosophy, because I'm a person reading this,
Mm-hmm.
and it like speaks to my experiences as opposed to just premises again. So that was the main thing I got out of it. And I think he's just hoping whoever reads his work has similar experiences. And it just sucks because he's writing in such obtuse language and it's kind of hard to grasp sometimes. But like Nance was saying, it's like you want to agree immediately, and that does make you skeptical. And I want to like sit down and be like, no, this is wrong, this is wrong, and this is wrong. It kind of was, because I don't think he's given Heidegger a completely fair shake, but I'm really enjoying what I'm reading, I guess, in the Levinasian sense.
Yeah, I think the enjoyment, like this explicit Heidegger that he's arguing with or responding to or overcoming or whatever, is very instrumental, very functional. But it's also not 100% wrong. Like Heidegger does have a preoccupation with survival, whereas Levinas with his enjoyment is like, no, there's more than just survival. There's more than just bare life. Now Heidegger does deal with that, and I think there's an implicit Heidegger in Levinas when you're reading, and then there's the explicit Heidegger. So when he's explicitly responding to Heidegger, I do think he doesn't give him a fair representation. But I think if you've read Heidegger and then you go on to read Levinas, you can also see the implicit Heidegger. So yeah, but the use of the hammer as opposed to the enjoyment of the use of the hammer, that kind of opens us up to be able to say, no, I do want something more than just survival. I want to have a good life and I want to enjoy it. And yeah, I like it a lot.
No, I agree with that. I guess too, it's just like care. Like when he talks about care, it's like I still think care is fundamental, because it's like when he's talking about enjoyment, I think there's a certain element of care in
Yep.
that,
Yep.
because it's like called attention to. And that I think is like you're saying, like when it's like kind of like he's giving him a little bit more of a fair shake in that aspect. And I think you're right that he's attacking kind of that, like, okay, the pragmatist or like the instrumental Heidegger. And I think it's just because all he read was early Heidegger.
Mm-hmm.
he didn't like later Heidegger, and I think later Heidegger, like after the turn, and I don't want to turn this into like a Heideggerian thing because nobody cares about that, but he, I feel like that's when he gets a little bit closer to like putting the human back into the equation. And I think if Levinas like gave that a fair shake, the two aren't completely opposed to one another. I think they could help each other.
Yeah. Yeah, dude.
I want to raise something as a complication. Um,
Please.
at first, when I was reading this section, I had the impression that enjoyment is something Levinas is maybe even wanting to encourage us to do. Um, just because it is kind of talked in like he's describing situations that are like, ooh, yeah, I do enjoy that. I like that. Um, but like for instance, I guess I should say I'm not sure how much it's related though to us being individual, and how much of enjoyment actually plays a part in a relationship with the other. It seems like some of the things I'm reading suggest that enjoyment is something that just happens with the I as opposed to the relation with the other. So for instance, page 114, um, the subsection number 3 is called enjoyment and independence. But more specifically, on page 118, kind of towards the lower end, he says this: the self-sufficiency of enjoying measures the egoism or the ipseity of the ego and the same. Enjoyment is a withdrawal into oneself, an involution. And he kind of keeps talking about that a little bit more. But it started to make me think like, oh, is this thing of enjoying um is it sounds like he's saying it's these are like nice things that you can have as an I, but then I'm kind of curious to see how he introduces the other and where enjoyment, if enjoyment plays a part in once the other is in your world.
Yeah. So the like the enjoyment being this thing that individuates.
Mm.
I think it's I think it's I think it becomes a complex relationship because he's like, yeah, this enjoyment is happening on the inside of you. And seeing the face of the other involves like recognizing and honoring their capacity to enjoy in this way. So it can become like, if you were purely utilitarian, it could become like a war for who's going to have the most enjoyment, which is why there are people who are like, well, let's maximize enjoyment, let's minimize suffering. But Levinas is definitely not advocating for like a utilitarian point of view. He's it becomes a complex relationship, and like part of welcoming the other is like honoring their enjoyment. But also like you as the subject in question, the fact that you enjoy is, it's not a fact that you can run away from or negate. And like your enjoyment, your interior content does matter. And it's the fact that you and the other are like trying to bridge the gap. You're venturing out into the whirlwind. You're trying to cross this radical separation to have relations with one another. Like that's ethical. That's the ethical relation. So it's complex and it's a balancing act. maybe it's a juggling act where you got to constantly juggle, and you can't instrumentalize it into this like thing where it's always going to be easy, or it's like it's always you found the one right way to do it, and that's the right way every time. Like, no, there is no right way. Like it's a living environment that we're in, and the other brings just as much to the table as you, the self-same, the subject, and you guys are going to have to figure shit out on your own. That's why we need to honor the ethical relation. That's why it's important to welcome the other. It's a good question, dude, because like enjoyment definitely individuates. Like enjoyment is, mine and mine alone. The satisfaction I get from this chew belongs to me and only me. And if I withdraw into this to this enjoyment, this satisfaction, then I'm going to miss out on welcoming the other and having a chance at that face-to-face encounter. Which is like interiority versus exteriority. Like if you become fascinated with the sensuous, the external world, or maybe the simple external world, then that kind of takes you out of being able to engage on a human level. Because you're worried about satisfying rather than like the journey itself. Like I have a lack, and I am more concerned with filling this lack. There's a negativity in my world. I don't have a chew in my mouth. So let me put a chew in my mouth. There, problem solved. And if I'm always in that scarcity mindset of like satisfaction, needs and satisfaction of needs, then you're never in that space of Levinasian desire where you're truly trying to encounter others. So I have a crazy headache, by the way. So if I'm a little slow or whatever, it's because my shit's killing me. But you guys want to jump into it?
Yeah, I'm
Yes.
All right. So starting on page 109, I'll start. Section A, separation as life. 1. Intentionality and the social relation. In describing the metaphysical relation as disinterested, as disengaged from all participation, we would be wrong to recognize in it intentionality, in the consciousness of simultaneously proximity and distance. For this Husserlian term evokes the relation with the object, the posited, the thematic, whereas the metaphysical relation does not link up a subject with an object. It is not that our intent be anti-intellectualist. In contradistinction to the philosophers of existence, we will not found the relation with the existent respected in its being, and in this sense absolutely exterior, that is, metaphysical, on being in the world, the care and doing characteristic of the Heideggerian Dasein. Doing, labor, already implies the relation with the transcendent. If cognition, in the form of the objectifying act, does not seem to us to be at the level of the metaphysical relation, this is not because the exteriority contemplated as an object, the theme, would draw from the subject as fast as the abstractions proceed. On the contrary, it does not withdraw enough. The contemplation of objects remains close to action. It disposes of its theme and consequently comes into play on a plane where one being limits another. Metaphysics approaches without touching. Its way is not an action, but the social relation. But is the social relation. But we maintain that the social relation is experienced preeminently, for it takes place before the existent that expresses himself, that is, remains in himself. In distinguishing between the objectifying act and the metaphysical, we are on our way not to the denunciation of intellectualism, but to its very strict development, if it is true that the intellect desires being in itself. It will therefore be necessary to show the difference that separates the relations analogous to transcendence from those of transcendence itself. The relations of transcendence lead to the other, whose mode the idea of infinity has enabled us to specify. Even if they rest on transcendence, the relations analogous to transcendence and the objectifying act among them remain within the same. The analysis of the relations that are produced within the same, to which the present section is devoted, will in reality describe the interval of separation. The formal pattern of separation is not that of every relation, a simultaneity of distance between the terms and their union. In the case of separation, the union of the terms maintains separation in an immanent sense. The being that is in relation absolves itself from the relation, is absolute within relationship. Its concrete analysis as it is undertaken by a being who accomplishes it, and who does not cease to accomplish it while analyzing it, will, we have indicated, recognize separation as inner life, or as psychism. But in turn, this interiority will appear as a presence at home with oneself, which means inhabitation and economy. The psychism and the perspectives it opens maintain the distance that separates the metaphysician from the metaphysical, and their resistance to totalization. So, let's take a shot at summing up those two paragraphs.
My main note from those was I put Levinas is maintaining this distinction of metaphysics as social relation from ontology as an action and contemplation. He's making a line in the sand. So that's kind of what I got as the main message, is he's kind of reiterating what he kind of laid out already about his he's saying, yeah, metaphysics, social relationship. Heidegger and Husserl kind of doing something different from that, where it's like about thinking and being and objects. But Levinas wants to talk about how there is this thing of psychism, like inner life or like inner thinking. Um, and I also like that specific line of where he says metaphysics approaches without touching. Its way is not an action, but is the social relation. It almost sounds Taoist or something. The way of no way.
Yeah, man. And going back to some of the conversation we were having before we went live, just as with Heidegger, like when reading this, a lot of parallels can be drawn to Eastern thought, what gets kind of lumped up into that, category. And there are a lot of rhyming stanzas there. But I think there is a tendency to want to like flatten and say, oh, it's just this. And we've even had some people who like wanted to do that during the Being in Time course. Like there were some people who want, oh, it's just, that's just Buddhism. And it's like, yeah, you can use the similarities to kind of elucidate these concepts, because they can be a bit tough and tricky to kind of deal with. but you definitely don't want to flatten it out and say it's just this, it's just that. In fact, like you gotta maintain the Tao of reading Levinas. Like it's this tightrope walk where I think the moment you try to grasp it and be like, this is what it is, you kind of miss out on something else. So you can't come at it from this kind of operationalized grasping that he kind of problematized in the earlier sections. That I like how he, and it's not like a proper thing, but we were talking about good understanding versus bad understanding. And that's a shortcut. And that's like a shorthand that kind of emerged, that we're kind of in on it. So I could say the bad understanding, or like one of us can make reference to the bad understanding, and we know what we're talking about. But it's like he's not saying there's a bad way to understand and a good way to understand. Like you have to have this comprehension in the world. Like you have to understand the world. You even have to understand the idea of infinity in this way to put it to use in you. So it's not that it's a bad understanding, but there's comprehension, and then there's entendre, or intention, but spelled with an E instead of an I. And it comes down to the intentionality of your understanding. Are you trying to implement this to your benefit, or to prop up, an argument, or even to prop up your ego? Because that's what people become in like the two-dimensional flattened world. People cease to be people, and they become objects to prop up your own identity, or to reify the self-same, or to reify your concept of the world and your context, your situation within the world. But to really be properly human, you have to say, no, I can't grasp and manipulate people in this way. So you can understand something about them, but your intention going into it can't be acquisitive. And he does talk about possessing and kind of labor and doing and acting, and he's almost like derisive to labor at times. Like, but I don't know, he's not doing like this let me withdraw from the world thing. He really is like, let me get out there into the world, but you have to maintain this position of like, no, I don't own and I don't possess others. You nevertheless have to like understand something about them. But whenever you say, oh, it's just this, it's just that, or even when you like genuinely try to explain it, like I think as you grasp down on it, like something important kind of slips through your grasp, because that's just the nature of this stuff. Like it's it's noumenal, right? He's thinking about separation, radical alterity, things that we just don't have access to. And he's like saying, hey, phenomenology is great and all, but we have to make this distinction. But in making this distinction, we can't withdraw from it. Like you still have to face it. In fact, it's good that you encounter it, that you seek it out. You go out there into the wild blue yonder, the big scary world, where the there is the whirlwind, and you try to encounter other people, and you try to welcome the other, and you try to have this face-to-face relationship. That is acting ethically. Anyway, that was all kind
that
of
was great.
unnecessary.
No, I was gonna say you kind of summed it up. Like I was reading this book about Freud a while ago, and the guy who wrote it was saying he had like a little, like almost like a Funko Pop of Freud, and he was saying that Freud now has become reduced
Yeah.
to that character, and it's like you kind of want to possess and like own not even in like the owning in like the Heideggerian sense, but like in literally like, okay, like I'm reducing it to something tangible, so I have mastery over it and it submits to me. And I feel like what you're saying, what Levinas is saying is no, alterity is a thing. You can't, like, we're separate in the fact that only I, like, he's going to bring up to have my own enjoyment. But he says right here on 110, the being that is in relation absolves itself from the relation is absolute within relationship. You can't get out of it. There's no, it's just the way it is. It's like you can sit there and like Glycerol can do his phenomenology and his reduction, like you're saying, but we're first primarily here in a relation. And that's what he's going to talk about. And then he's going to talk about interiority, which you can still talk about. But remember, though, that like that coffee cup was made by somebody,
Mhm.
and that same person can have their unique enjoyment of it. So I think he's just laying it all out on the table. But I think that was all spot on, though.
Hell yeah. Okay. Section 2, living from enjoyment, the notion of accomplishment. We live from good soup, air, light, spectacles, work, ideas, sleep, etc. These are not objects of representations. We live from them. Nor is what we live from a means of life, as the pen is a means with respect to the letter it permits us to write, nor a goal of life, as communication is the goal of the letter. The things we live from are not tools, nor even implements in the Heideggerian sense of the term. Their existence is not exhausted by the utilitarian schematism that delineates them as having the existence of hammers, needles, or machines. They are always in a certain measure, and even the hammers, needles, and machines are objects of enjoyment, presenting themselves to taste already adorned, embellished. Moreover, whereas the recourse to the instrument implies finality and indicates a dependence with regard to the other, living from delineates independence itself, the independence of enjoyment and of its happiness, which is the original pattern of all independence.
Conversely, the independence of happiness always depends on a content. It is the joy or the pain of breathing, looking, eating, working, handling the hammer and the machine, etc. But the dependence of happiness on the content is not that of the effect on a cause. The contents from which life lives are not always indispensable to it for the maintenance of that life as a means or a fuel, carbon or not, necessary for the functioning of existence. Or at least they are not lived as such. With them we die, and sometimes prefer to die rather than be without them. Still, the moment of restoration, for example, is phenomenologically included in the nourishing of oneself, and it is even the essential, though in order to account for it, we do not have to resort to any of the knowledge a physiologist or economist possesses. Nourishment as a means of invigoration is the transmutation of the other into the same, which is in the essence of enjoyment, an energy that is other, recognized as other. Recognized, we will see, is sustaining the very act that is directed upon it. Becomes in enjoyment my own energy, my strength, me. All enjoyment is in this sense elimination. Hunger is need, is privation in the primal sense of the word, and thus precisely living from. It is not a simple becoming conscious of what fills life. These contents are lived, they feed life. One lives one's life. To live is a sort of transitive verb, and the contents of life are its direct objects. And the act of living those contents is ipso facto a content of life. The relation with the direct object of the verb to exist, which since the philosopher existence has become transitive, in fact resembles the relation with nourishment, where there's a relation with an object, and at the same time a relation with this relation, which also nourishes and fills life. One does not only exist one's pain or one's joy, one exists from pains and joys. Enjoyment is precisely this way the act nourishes itself with its own activity. To live from bread is therefore neither to represent bread to oneself, nor to act on it, nor to act by means of it. To be sure, it is necessary to earn one's bread, and it is necessary to nourish oneself in order to earn one's bread. Thus, the bread I eat is also that with which I earn my bread in my life. But if I eat my bread in order to labor and to live, I live from my labor and from my bread. Bread and labor do not, in the Pascalian sense, divert me from the bare fact of existence or occupy the emptiness of my time. Enjoyment is the ultimate consciousness of all the contents that fill my life. It embraces them. The life that I earn is not a bare existence. It is a life of labor and nourishments. These are contents which do not preoccupy it only, but which occupy it, which entertain it, of which it is enjoyment. Even if the content of life ensures my life, the means is immediately sought as an end, and the pursuit of this end becomes an end in turn. Thus, things are always more than the strictly necessary. They make up the grace of life. We live from our labor, which ensures our subsistence. We also live from our labor because it fills, delights, or saddens life. The first meaning of to live from one's labor reverts to the second. If the things are in place, qua object, the object seen occupies life, but the vision of the object makes up the joy of life. This does not mean that there is here a vision of vision. Life's relation with its own dependence on the things is enjoyment, which as happiness is independence. The acts of life are not straightforward droids, and as it were strained toward their finality. We live in the consciousness of consciousness, but this consciousness of consciousness is not reflection. It is knowing. It is not knowing, but enjoyment. As we shall say, the very egoism of life. To say that we live from contents is therefore not to affirm that we resort to them as to conditions for ensuring our life, taken as the bare fact of existing. The bare fact of life is never bare. Life is not the naked will to be an ontological sujet for this life. Life's relation with the very conditions of its own life become the nourishment and content of that life. Life is love of life, a relation with contents that are not my being, but more dear than my being. Thinking, eating, sleeping, reading, working, warming oneself in the sun, distinct from my substance, but constituting it. These contents make up the worth, prigs, of my life. When reduced to pure and naked existence, like the existence of the shades Ulysses visits in Hades, life dissolves into a shadow. Life is an existence that does not precede its essence. Its essence makes up its worth, prigs, and here value, lore, constitutes being. The reality of life is already on a level of happiness, and in this sense beyond ontology. Happiness is not an accident of being, since being is risk for happiness. Terrence, if you're listening to this, I'm sorry for my French.
Yeah, dude, I disavow my French pronunciation. It's something that I can do when I try, and I in order to absolve myself of the shame of not being good at it, I just don't try.
Good call.
Yeah.
All right. In living from ... is not simply a representation of something. Living from ... also does not fit into the categories of activity and potency, determinative for Aristotelian ontology. The Aristotelian act was equivalent to being. Placed within a system of ends and means, man actualized himself in exceeding his apparent limits by action. Like every other nature, human nature accomplished itself, that is, became entirely itself, by functioning, by entering into relations. Every being is an exercise of being, and the identification of thought with action, then, is non-metaphorical. If living from ... enjoyment likewise consists in entering into relation with something other, this relation does not take form on the plane of pure being. Moreover, action itself, which unfolds on the plane of being, enters into our happiness. We live from acts, and from the very act of being, just as we live from ideas and sentiments. What I do and what I am is at the same time that from which I live. We relate ourselves to it with the relation that is neither theoretical nor practical. Behind theory and practice, there is enjoyment of theory and of practice, the egoism of life. The final relation is enjoyment, happiness. Enjoyment is not a psychological state among others, the affective tonality of empiricist psychology, but the very pulsation of the I. In enjoyment, we maintain ourselves always at the second power, which, however, is not yet the level of reflection. For happiness, in which we move already by the simple fact of living, is always beyond being, in which the things are honed. It is an outcome, but one where the memory of the aspiration confers upon the outcome the character of an accomplishment, which is worth more than ataraxy. Pure existing is ataraxy. Happiness is accomplishment. Enjoyment is made of the memory of its thirst. It is a quenching. It is the act that remembers its potency. It does not express, as Heidegger would have it, the mode of my implantation, my disposition in being, the tonus of my bearing. It is not my bearing in being, but already the exceeding of being. Being itself befalls him who can seek happiness as a new glory above substantiality. Being itself is a content which makes up the happiness or unhappiness of him who does not simply realize his nature, but seeks in being a triumph inconceivable in the order of substances. Substances are only what they are. The independence of happiness is therefore to be distinguished from the independence that, for philosophers, substance possesses. It is as though the existent could aspire to a new triumph above and beyond the plenitude of being. The plenitude of being. To be sure, the objection can be brought against us that the imperfection of the existing in existent disposes of alone renders this triumph possible and precious, and that the triumph can coincide only with the plenitude of existing. But we shall then say that the strange possibility of an incomplete being is already the opening of the order of happiness, and the ransom paid for this promise of an independence higher than substantiality. Happiness is a condition for activity, if activity means a commencement occurring in duration, which nevertheless is continuous. Action implies being, to be sure, but it marks a beginning and an end in an anonymous being, where end and beginning have no meaning. But within this continuity, enjoyment realizes independence with regard to continuity. Each happiness comes for the first time. Subjectivity originates in the independence and sovereignty of enjoyment.
Plato speaks of the soul that feasts on truths. He discerns in rational thought, in which the sovereignty of the soul is manifested, a relation with the object that is not only contemplative, but confirms the same characteristic of the thinker in its sovereignty. In the meadow that lies in the plain of truth, that pasturage is found which is suited to the highest part of the soul, and the wing on which the soul soars is nourished with this. What enables the soul to rise to truth is nourished with truth. Throughout this book, we are opposing the full analogy drawn between truth and nourishment because metaphysical desire is above life, and with regard to it, one cannot speak of satiety. But the Platonic image describes, with regard to thought, the very relationship that will be accomplished by life, where the attachment to the contents that fill it provides it with a supreme content. The consumption of foods is the food of life. Bum, 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 bum. All right, let's.
Why didn't he just say that last sentence?
Yeah, for
We
sure.
would have got it.
We got, yeah, it makes sense now, dude. Everything makes perfect sense. So let's take a stab at this subsection. The thing that jumps out at me the most is like, Cesar, where you brought up subjectivity originates in the independence and sovereignty of enjoyment. That, to me, like, I would just say enjoyment individuates. Like, it is this singular thing that, yeah, like, it's just like anxiety individuates, right? Like, it's this thing that can lead us to rush forward, but it could also lead us to sit back and just be enjoyers of things. And we don't want to sit back and be the lotus eaters, right? We don't want to withdraw from the world and become solitary enjoyers. So rather than taking it as this thing, as a negativity that we can satisfy, we should take it as evidence of other people's enjoyment. So we can sit back and we can benefit from it. And like, yeah, I eat good food to live, but also because I like the way good food tastes and feels, and I like the way it makes me feel. So rather than bare life, we should strive to have good things and a good life, but we should also take it as evidence of the fact that our actions have implications that extend out into exteriority. The consequences of my actions can give somebody else a negative enjoyment. So it's this complex thing that, yeah, it's proof of others' interiority. And then also the like satisfaction, desire versus need. So like metaphysical desire is this self-sustaining thing, self-fulfilling thing. Like it exists, and by the pursuit of it feeds itself. It's a fire that's feeding itself rather than just a lack or a negativity or a hole that can be filled in, which is earlier we were talking about like the LJA and enjoyment. If you become fascinated by enjoyment can become the shiny object, then it could turn into like this Lacanian desire where you're trying to satisfy this thing that simply cannot be satisfied. Like to think of satisfaction is a category error completely. The fact that we're calling it desire, we have to be careful that it's like the type of desire just doesn't include an end. It's an infinite desire. It's always forever going. So to think of an end of it, like, no, you're thinking of the wrong thing. The thing that we're talking about has no end. So it cannot be satisfied. It will not be satisfied. So it could become this kind of Lacanian desire that like it could start to operate as objet if all you're doing is being fascinated by the interiority. It becomes navel gazing, and you're like, I like good food, so I'm going to chase good food, and I'm going to make my ultimate for the sake of which to become a food enjoyer. You'll never be satisfied because it doesn't get satisfied. So if you become fascinated, If you become sidetracked by curiosity, then you'll run into this unfortunate situation. And so I've been saying desire versus need. Desire is a positivity, need is a lack. Need is a negativity. Negativities operate by getting filled. Positivities operate by protruding or extending. And nothing here is simple. I don't want to reduce anything and say it's just. But for the sake of the conversation, this enjoyment is something that could be both. And so part of our job as ethical actors or as metaphysicians is to maintain our enjoyment. And do we let it be proof of others? Do I let this be a good thing, or do I let this be a bad thing by turning into this like Lacanian fucking desire? That's so from that section, that's what I got. What else, or any comments on that? Am I wrong?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're wrong.
And the
Fuck
stream.
I mean, yeah, one of the last things you read, Nance, was I say this word as satiety, but how did you say it?
Satiety.
Satiety?
Satiety.
Satiety.
Like insatiable?
Like say shitty.
Yes. But it's
Okay.
it's like insatiable versus like the satiety is basically satisfaction. So when
Yeah.
you're
I'm
insatiable,
full.
you're sated.
Yeah.
Yes, sated is another way to say like I'm full. So satiety is satisfaction. Insatiable is something that just cannot be satisfied, and I think it has negative connotations, which is why Levinas doesn't use it. I don't think he ever uses insatiable. But it is that
Jagger.
yeah.
Yeah, on page 114, it's the sentence of throughout this book, we are opposing the full analogy drawn between truth and nourishment, because metaphysical big D desire is above life. And with regard to it, one cannot speak of satiety. So, I mean, that seems to be like a very clear, he's just basically saying like, yeah, when you're talking about this kind of desire, why would you ever talk about it getting fulfilled? Right? Like it's not, you can't. It's not part of that.
We could say metaphysical desire is an infinite phallus because it's protruding out into the world. But also when you are on this desire track rather than the small d desire, right? Like when we're on metaphysical Levinasian desire rather than Lacanian desire, we have all the power. So it is kind of like the phallus. Like one way to have the phallus, to be sure, is to realize that you're not trying to satisfy a need. You're not trying to fill in a lack. You're out here moving through the world. You're running forward into that dark night. You're seeking out face-to-face encounters, and that's empowering. Yeah, man, Levinas has a bigger phallus than Lacan, for sure. In fact, Levinas's phallus is infinite, dude.
Well, technically, so is Lacan's and his subjectivity.
But another thing that came up, well, I felt like he, like I basically got the point, I think, but because he's saying it so many times, it starts to make me think, wait, am I not understanding this point? which is, I mean, the way I summarized it was, one does not live on bread alone, but on every living enjoyment of bread.
Hmm.
You know, so basically, I felt like that's what he kept saying with these different examples, but I wasn't sure if I was like missing something uh in terms of like he's maybe getting at maybe little nuanced distinctions here and there, or if like honestly I'm kind of just he's just giving lots of examples, but like I kind of already got it, you know, I can't tell.
I think it's both. Like it's the continental thing of like repeating and hammering it home. It's playful at the same time too. And then it's like he's a very biblical guy too. So it's like man cannot live on bread alone. I think that's New Testament though, so ignore that part. But
No, that's Old Testament.
is it? Okay.
It's in the Torah.
It's both. Okay. But yeah, it's just life is not just mere survival. You gotta enjoy the bread too. So I think it's just like all of it wrapped up. Like just like the writer in him with like the wordplay, the continental aspect. And again, maybe I'm just reducing him to make it tangible for me.
No, you're not reducing him. I think all of us have done a good job throughout all these discussions of not reducing. We're implementing aids to understanding. And like again, like we have to comprehend. We have to grab. We have to grab because we don't want to sit back and we don't want to just be watching the waves crash over us, right? We want to surf on the motherfucking waves. So we have to be acquisitive. But our intention is not to manipulate our understanding to become a prop, to prop up our pre-existing preconceptions. The intention of our understanding is genuine understanding to aid us as we move into the whirlwind. And I think using these types of pedagogical tools or aids to understanding or whatever shortcuts, like I think it's great because it allows us to play a little bit more because we have some shared reference and you can say, is this like that? And as long as we take the time to like unpack it and double check each other and double check our own work, then it's not a reduction. Which is like just tangentially another thing that I think has emerged out of kind of the modality of what we're doing with the course that maybe 2 years ago, maybe all of us would have been doing nothing but reduction. But because we've kind of tried to develop this kind of rigorous framework of checking each other's understanding and shit like that, I don't think anything we've done is a reduction. Well,
it's true.
I don't think anything we've done
Not
is
in a negative
just a reduction.
sense. Yeah. Like people
I
just say like somebody's just Kierkegaard or something. But go ahead.
yeah. And I'm super guilty of that. But having this forum forces me to say what I mean. Because yeah, I'm horrible when it comes to it's just this. It's just this. The things we live from are not tools nor even implements in the Heideggerian sense of the term. That's on page 110 in the first paragraph. I think that's another instance of like Levinas explicitly maybe missing the point with Heidegger. But then like down here, he's still super Heideggerian. Like that's the thing, like the implicit Heidegger versus the explicit Heidegger. Like sure, maybe Levinas' explicit Heidegger is wrong or whack or not being fair, but I don't know. It just like it's dripping in like a proper understanding of Heidegger, which I don't know. Maybe it's just trivial, but I think it's a cool point.
Matters, though.
Yeah, I think it does matter. Like because Heidegger's project, Levinas is not saying like, Heidegger, you're wrong about everything. Like, I think
He's not
Levinas
throwing
is,
him out of the bathwater.
yeah, he's saying like, dude, Heidegger, you got really close to something, and I'm gonna build on that project. And the reason it matters, like Levinas is like, Heidegger, you got really close, but you're flawed. You're like, your flawed project is ultimately going to lead us into war. And like Heidegger's broken understanding or whatever it is of this kind of ethical relation led him to being an enthusiastic Nazi. And Levinas is like, dude, you got so much right, but this one little part that you got wrong matters. And the reason it matters is evidenced in the fact that you were an enthusiastic Nazi. But yeah, like fucking, there's so much Heidegger. It just like, people have said like, yeah, Levinas's Heidegger is wrong. It's like, yeah, sure, the explicit Heidegger, I'll give you that. But like, pay attention to what Levinas is doing. He's building on Heidegger, and that part isn't wrong.
There's a foundation that he uses, but corrects the course, so to speak, kind of.
So, are we ready for subsection 3? All right. Enjoyment and independence. We have said that to live from something does not amount to drawing vital energy from somewhere. Life does not consist in seeking and consuming the fuel furnished by breathing and nourishment, but, if we may so speak, in consummating terrestrial and celestial nourishments. Though it thus depends on what is not itself, this dependence is not without a counterpart which, in the final analysis, nullifies it. Oh, Jesus. What we live from does not enslave us. We enjoy it. Need cannot be interpreted as a simple lack, despite the psychology of need given by Plato, nor as pure passivity, despite Kantian ethics. The human being thrives on his needs. He is happy for his needs. The paradox of living from something, or as Plato would say, the folly of these pleasures, is precisely in a complacency with regard to what life depends on, not a mystery on the one hand and a dependence on the other, not a mastery, on the one hand and a dependence on the other, but a mastery in this dependence. Yeah. This is perhaps the very definition of complacency and pleasure. Living from is the dependency that turns into sovereignty, into happiness, essentially egoist. Need, the vulgar Venus, is also, in a certain sense, the child of Greek words and of another Greek word. It is another Greek word as source of yet one more Greek word. In contrast with desire, which is the Greek word of Greek word. What it lacks is its source of plenitude and wealth. Need, a happy dependence, is capable of satisfaction, like a void which gets filled. Physiology, from the exterior, teaches us that need is a lack. That man could be happy for his needs indicates that in human need, the physiological plane is transcended, that as soon as there is need, we are outside the categories of being. Even though in formal logic, the structures of happiness, independence through dependence, or I, or human creature, cannot show through without contradiction.
Need and enjoyment can be covered by the notions of activity and passivity, though they be merged in the notion of finite freedom. Enjoyment in relation with nourishment, which is the other of life, is an independent sui generis, the independence of happiness. The life that is life from something is happiness. Life is affectivity. Affectivity, sorry, I don't know what's wrong there. And sentiment. To live is to enjoy life. To despair of life makes sense only because originally life is happiness. Suffering is a failing of happiness. It is not correct to say that happiness is an absence of suffering. Happiness is made up not of an absence of needs, whose tyranny and imposed character one denounces, but of the satisfaction of all needs. For the privation of need is not just a privation, but is privation in a being that knows the surplus of happiness, privation in a being gratified. Happiness is accomplishment. It exists in a soul satisfied and not in a soul that has extirpated its needs, a castrated soul. And because life is happiness, it is personal. The personality of the person, the ipseity of the I, which is more than the particularity of the atom and of the individual, is the particularity of the happiness of enjoyment. Enjoyment accomplishes the atheist separation. It deformalizes the notion of separation, which is not a cleavage made in the abstract, but the existence at home with itself of a autochthonous I. The soul is not, as in Plato, what has the care of an inanimate being everywhere. It is, to be sure, dwells in what is not itself, but it acquires its own identity by this dwelling in the other, and not logically by opposition to the other. Section 4, Need Incorporated. If enjoyment is the very eddy of the same, it is not ignorance, but exploitation of the other. The alterity of the other, the world is surmounted by need, which enjoyment remembers and is enkindled by. Need is the primary movement of the same. To be sure, need is also a dependence with regard to the other, but it is a dependence across time, a dependence that is not an instantaneous betraying of the same, but a suspension or postponement of dependence, and thus the possibility to break by labor and by economy, the very thrust of the alterity upon which need depends. In denouncing as illusory the pleasures that accompany the satisfaction of needs, Plato has fixed the negative notion of need. It would be a lack that satisfaction would make good. The essence of need would be visible in the need to scratch oneself with scabies and sickness. Must we remain at a philosophy of need that apprehends it in poverty? Poverty is one of the dangers the liberation of man breaking with the animal and vegetable condition risks. In need, the essential is in this rupture, despite this risk. To conceive of need as a simple privation is to apprehend it in the midst of a disorganized society, which leaves it neither time nor consciousness. The distance intercalated between man and the world on which he depends constitutes the essence of need. A being has detached itself from the world from which it still nourishes itself. The part of being that has detached itself from the whole in which it was enrooted disposes of its own being and its relation with the world it henceforth only need. It frees itself from all the weight of the world, from immediate and incessant contacts. It is at a distance. This distance can be converted into time and subordinate a world to the liberated but needy being. There is here an ambiguity of which the body is the very articulation. Animal need is liberated from vegetable dependence, but this liberation is itself dependence and uncertainty. An animal's need is inseparable from struggle and fear. The exterior world from which it is liberated remains a threat, but need is also the time of labor, a relation with an other yielding its alterity, to be cold, hungry, thirsty, naked, to seek shelter. All these dependencies, with regard to the world, having become needs, saves the instinctive being from anonymous menaces and constitute a being independent of the world, veritable subject capable of ensuring the satisfaction of its needs, which are recognized as material. That is, as admitting of satisfaction. Needs are in my power. They constitute me as the same and not as dependent on the other. My body is not only a way for the subject to be reduced to slavery, to depend on what is not itself, but is also a way of possessing and of working, of having time, of overcoming the very alterity of what I have to live from. The body is the very self-possession by which the I, liberated from the world by need, succeeds in overcoming the very destitution of this liberation. We shall return to this further.
Having recognized its needs as material needs, as capable of being satisfied, the I can henceforth turn to what it does not lack. It distinguishes the material from the spiritual, opens to big desire. Labor, however, already requires discourse and consequently the height of the other irreducible to the same, the presence of the big other. There is no natural religion, but already human egoism leaves pure nature by virtue of the human body raised upwards, committed in the direction of height. This is not its empirical illusion, but its ontological production and its ineffaceable testimony. The I can proceeds from this height. Let us again note the difference between need and big desire. In need, I can sink my teeth into the real and satisfy myself in assimilating the other. In big desire, there is no sinking one's teeth into being, no satiety. How do you say it again?
Say shitty. It's just
Satiety.
say shitty. Yeah. Like
Yeah.
say shitty.
In big desire, there is no sinking one's teeth into being, no satiety, but an uncharted future before me. Indeed, the time presupposed by need is provided me by big desire. Human need already rests on big desire. Need has thus the time to convert this other into the same by labor. I exist as a body, that is, as raised up, an organ that will be able to grasp and consequently place itself in this world on which I depend, before ends technically realizable. For a body that labors everything is not already accomplished, already done. Thus, to be a body is to have time in the midst of the facts, to be me through living in the other. This revelation of distance is an ambiguous revelation, for time both destroys the security of instantaneous happiness and permits the fragility thus discovered to be overcome. And it is the relation with the other, inscribed in the body as its elevation, that makes possible the transformation of enjoyment into consciousness and labor.
I wonder. I need to go back and reread and see what he's doing with labor. Because I can get like I can kind of intuit or whatever, like context clues, kind of pick up on what he's doing, but I don't know, labor is a very specific word and it has very specific meanings in different contexts. And it just dawned on me right now that he was using labor and that I don't know how he's using labor. I kind of think like I kind of feel what he's getting at. Like labor is this like productive, pro-social type of like working in the world and on the world. But I don't know. It's something I want to go back and pay closer attention to because Heidegger has a very specific opinion on labor. Marx has a very specific opinion on labor. I have my own kind of very specific opinion on labor. And it just now jumped out at me as like, oh, that's something worth going back and paying closer attention to because I think he introduces it in this section or like in maybe the section above. Like it doesn't come up until right now.
I think it's in like the different he switches context to kind of without any like, so it's like you have to pay extra close attention because I feel the same. I know Zach, I think it was the first class, he was talking about like totality and infinity is like a capitalist critique, but it's like I can see him talking about labor in like the capitalist or Marxist sense, but I also see it as like it is cold out. I have to chop wood, and that labor of chopping the wood is for the fire to keep us warm. But it's also like I need to buy groceries, so it's that sense too.
Yeah.
So I think I agree with you. It's very hard to differentiate between the two.
I
I know Zach read it before, so I don't know if the
yeah.
entirety of it goes into it later. And the section is called economy too.
Yeah.
Interiority and economy. So
Yeah.
economy can also mean multiple things.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, economy could mean I mean, Jesus, dude, economy could just be a play on interiority and exteriority, right? Because economy broken down, like the home and the law, right? Or it could be like explicitly talking about economy and political economy and this and that. It's almost wild that this section is titled economy. God damn. Oh no, I do think Levinas is critiquing capital because he's critiquing instrumentalization.
Mm.
And capital is an instrumentalization machine. But that's one of these things that like it is more implicit. Like he's not coming out and saying workers of the world, rise up, do the face to face. This is how we will overcome the machine. But yeah, I definitely think this is super anti-capital. But I mean, did Levinas have that view of capital? I doubt it.
Remember Dave talking about, I don't know if it was in the preface or he was talking about ethics in Infinity. I remember hearing Dave. I don't know what it was in. It could even be the William Large thing. I don't want to digress too much, but an interviewer, I think it was Philip Nemo, asked him about Marx,
Yeah.
and he like dodged the question kind
Yeah.
of. So it's like I know he had to have been familiar in some sense, but it's like I don't know if that was intentional because he wanted to answer the other thing, but
Yeah.
it kind of tracks.
It does. It definitely tracks. But like Marx and Marxism and critique of political economy and all the other things that you could extrapolate from saying yes, I'm a Marxist, have a lot of baggage. So while I think if you take a careful reading of Marx and you do a careful reading of this book, like for me, there's a lot of shit that I'm like, oh yeah. But most people don't really do a careful reading of Marx, and they would actually be like, yeah, fuck Levinas. Especially like he's a European Jew. We just saw World War II. Like there's just a lot of baggage. I can totally see him not wanting to have anything to do with Marxism.
That could be why he's distancing himself from Heidegger a little bit too, because I know Merleau-Ponty did too.
Oh yeah. So
I thought of an interesting maybe definition of what labor is being meant here. Just kind of like looking at what internet sources were saying. Um, I mean, they were saying just like the quick searches I found, it was saying that uh it shouldn't be thought of as a labor in the economic sense. Um, the way that Levinas is using it. Um, and so I'm kind of thinking, okay, maybe if he's talking about a labor specifically as towards the other, I'm almost starting to think of the way people it got pretty fashionable in like college campuses and whatnot to say like emotional labor.
oh
Like
dude.
the amount of emotional labor I had to put towards this person, you know. But I think Levinas maybe has like um a version of something like that, of what he means by labors. Maybe some some kind of effort that needs to be put towards actually not just yourself, your own needs, but to something outside the exteriority.
Yeah, like I'm definitely taking it as like a good thing, like a pro-social form of like this is our responsibility. And it's like this is a labor that we actually like engage in to build the bridge. Um so yeah, it is. I mean, I guess you could say emotional labor earnestly. Like I think if we're gonna use emotional labor today, I think everybody's gonna be memeing on it. Like everyone's gonna be like, oh, you put me through emotional labor. But maybe back in the 50s, people Levinas wasn't jaded yet. So he's earnestly using this kind of concept to be like, yeah, you do have to do emotional labor. Damn, dude. To conceptualize the Ilia, the outside, this radical kind of separation that separates us, to put that in the commons. And maybe this doesn't matter. Like maybe like, so the commons like is this shared resource that there's no value until we add the value through human activity, through human labor. The sweat of our brow, the blood, sweat, whatever, blah blah blah. Well, you're an anarchist, Cesar, or you at least were, right? So you understand like the way that works.
For any government agents listening, he's joking.
Yeah. No, I say that in a good way. Like I mean, you're the good kind.
I've described it as you can be an anarchist in this world. You just have to realize you're choosing a loser's position.
Yeah. And you know what? Like if you understand that and what that means and you choose it, I think it's a noble choice. And I lean in that direction. But no, like so I don't know. The fact that he's talking about labor, I just think it's a pretty cool way to think about exteriority as part of the commons. And then there's labor that we have to do in order to kind of build these bridges, and construct frameworks that facilitate the face-to-face relation and the welcoming of the other. I realize that's like a diversion, but
I think you're going deeper though than what he is in a good way.
For
So
sure,
it's like
for
what
sure, yeah.
Levinas is. I think he's using it like laborers, and you're focused on your own needs and what you have to do. And we should be focusing on the ethical. And you're saying we could take like actual labor, whatnot, focus on the commons, make it like you're jumping off of Levinas, and that's what I
Yeah.
think is more important than just what he's saying. It's what he's saying is invoking in you.
Yeah, and even like turning the whirlwind into the commons, like the ethical relation. Like we're always already in this ethical relation, and people can ignore it, and people often do ignore it. And they're just like, I don't know. I don't know. I think I need to write about it, but like turning the there is into the commons. I like it, and I think I am gonna write about it. But yeah, like that ethical relation requires work on the part of the self same. But also I can presuppose work on the part of the other as well. I think in a complex relation, right? Because you can be the other of the other only in complex relations. But like I think that's the thing. Like if we all just saw it that way, we would realize like, oh, my freedom impinges on your freedom, and so we gotta work up some type of like arrangement where I'm as free as I can be, and so are you. But I don't know, maybe it's overcomplicating it.
I don't think so. I think it's making it more relevant in a sense, because like you can read this in a dusty sense, where it's like, okay, yeah, I'm
Yeah,
doing stuff
dude.
to get stuff I want, me, but I need to put that aside because I'm ethical, because the others is like transcendent relationship, and I need to have that revelation. And you're like, okay, yes, do that, but also do that because like your freedom and your neighbor's freedom is just as important as your own.
Yeah.
So I think you're just kind of like putting it in a deep context and saying like it's pretty much Levinas and Marx put together
Yeah.
in a good way
Yeah.
and marrying the two. You should write about it though, because I feel like you got something that needs to be fleshed out
Yeah,
more, and I think it would resonate with people.
for sure. So
My first note for this whole last part that we read was don't understand this subsection. Second time I feel mostly the same. Like I think I've only gotten 10%, a little bit more out of it. Um and I think maybe you're right though in that I would need to understand what's being said about the words need and labor, and maybe even like a couple of other words he's using, because I think he's using them so much that if I don't understand what those are, I'm gonna not, I'm gonna have so many holes in this whole section that it doesn't resonate anything. Um yeah, because I think I was getting starting to lose it a little bit of just what exactly what the point was of that he was trying to make. I wasn't grasping it. So I'm not sure if any of you have maybe a better summation of like all the whole thing of what's being said, or if we could only maybe talk about specific little sentences at this point.
Feel like I felt like how you felt the first time I read it, and I still feel like it's kind of hazy, but I feel like I can see more like the tail and like make heads or tails of it from the first time I read it, because I think my eyes were like glazing over and I had to reread this section twice when I was reading it, but it's still like I wasn't connecting the dots as much, but I can kind of trace what he's doing, I think. And it's like right now he's talking about the interior aspect, the individual, the economy of it, and how it big picture should relate and be transcended to the ethical relation, the other radical alterity. And it's like he's kind of mapping it or just focusing on one little subsection of it. I could be wrong, but that's just kind of how I see it fleshing out.
I think in this subsection, I think he's doing work to kind of solidify the idea that we are not just animals. And like differentiating desire and need, and then kind of, especially in this section, like he's focusing on need and the way we satisfy our needs, and playing with like the difference between like animals and humans. Like we get this type of gratification, we can get this enjoyment from the satisfaction of our needs. Like my dog loves eating dog food, They love food. And when they eat, they satisfy their hunger. And I mean, yeah, dogs have emotions, but like to, I guess, reduce them for the sake of the argument, they don't have the emotions that we have. So like,
Or maybe you could say it as they have that need the same way that we have a need to eat, but we just impregnate need so much more with humans that I think at one point Levinas says like we're even willing to like die if we
yeah,
can't satisfy we would rather die than to not have these things in some
yes.
ways.
And
Whereas dogs would be like, no, why would I do that?
yeah, like, no, if my dog's hungry and I don't feed him, they're still going to lick my face. They're not going to go on a hunger strike and be like, well, God damn it, you fucking bastard, I'm going to rise up against you and wage a war for my freedom. Like dogs are not going to launch a war on humans.
Be cool if they did though.
It would be cool, dude. But like he's talking about being enslaved to your needs. And if needs are a simple lack, or if you deny something else, and your needs are just like this mathematical, I'm hungry, I'm going to eat. Now that I've ate, I'm going to poop. Now that I've pooped, I'm going to go to bed. Like if you are just kind of machinic and instrumental in the chasing the satisfaction of your needs, then you will be enslaved to your needs. And it takes labor on the part of the self-same or the subject to not allow yourself to become enslaved to your needs. So I think he is kind of like creating kind of like a map of the interior, or describing the work that's required on our part to engage in the ethical relation. Like before we can venture out into the wilderness, we have to construct ourselves into worthy beings. We don't want to be enslaved to our needs. We don't want it to become this kind of instrumental hamster wheel, which it can be. It very easily can become that. And I think, again, to take it back to Lacan, like that's a huge like point of departure from libidinal economy. Like Levinas is saying, yeah, libidinal economy is a thing, and it works, and you get satisfaction, you get enjoyment, you get pleasure, you get happiness. But it's not just a privation. Like need is not just a lack. There's also like a higher capacity for, human satisfaction, human contentment, or whatever that accompanies these needs. So you like part of the labor that we have to do on our part here in the interior is to like not become enslaved to those needs, so that we can then be worthwhile humans in the first place. I think that's this section.
I think what Cesar was saying, what you're saying too, Nance, can be summed up. We're on 117. He says there's no natural religion, but already human egoism leads pure nature by virtue of the human body raised upwards, committed in the direction of height. This is not its empirical illusion, but its ontological production and its ineffaceable testimony. The I can proceeds from this height. I think it's literally the writings on the wall.
Fuck yeah, dude. And that to go back again before we went live, you had mentioned height, verticality and shit. And yeah, dude, like it is coming back to this we are animals who can stand up and like separate ourselves from this natural religion. Like, and this, I mean, even Dave likes to do it. I like to do it too. Take it back to spiritual nourishment. Take it back to estranged labor. Like we are these creatures who have a capacity to climb the fucking mountain. And not only do we have the capacity, but like we gain something human from the process of climbing that mountain. And to flatten us out to just, oh, we're animals and we are rational beings, and oh, invisible hands, aren't those things cool? Like, no, you're missing the fucking point. Like you're playing right into the trap that capital wants you to be in, where you think the world works in this mechanistic 1-for-1 type thing. But no, like we're cool. Humans are cool, and you better believe it, bucko, or some fucking shit. I don't know.
It reminds me of. Have you ever heard when somebody asked Edmund Hillary why why people climb Mount Everest? He says because it's there, and he's like, if you wanted to, like, you can figure out how the human being, like scientists might say it's important because you can figure out like how high you could breathe and what goes wrong with the body and all that. Well, John believes like that's not why I'm doing it. Or you could say like it'll raise money for Nepal. So like economically, it's like it's not for any of that. He's like, I'm not doing it for fame. I'm not doing it. And I feel like that's the kind of height and elevation that people truly should aspire to in a sense. And I think Levinas is kind of like hinting at.
Yeah, dude. Levinas is out ahead of. Cool. He's out ahead of Sloterdijk on this one, for sure.
Do y'all have a an understanding of how this aspect of height is used? I felt like maybe we've talked about it, or Dave's already talked about it, but I'm kind of blanking on what it means.
I think he's just like making this distinction of like the worm versus the human, like the base animal versus the human animal. Like we have the capacity for more. Like we are higher up on whatever hierarchy we want to create. And that's excellence. That's the pure utilitarian amount of pleasure or suffering. I think there's more to height. That's another thing I want to write about, like with Bourdieu and with distinction and nobility and kind of distance from necessity. I think there's also an element of like getting out of the scarcity mindset, getting out of the kind of instrumental need satisfaction. Like when you have the space to think and reflect and feel and be and breathe, then you have a higher capacity to like recognize the other and welcome the other in, because you're not in this kind of very mechanistic crawl just to satisfy your base needs. But yeah, I think it's, I don't know, just like that difference between the base animals and the human animal.
It's not horizontal, like flattened out.
Yeah.
You're going above, you have something to reach for, to aspire to.
Yeah.
Not to sound like inspirational, but it's just like the whole transcendent and revelation. It's just looking up and just realizing there's that higher capacity. It's not the eye of the ego and I'm just working for this the instrumentality, the animalistic, like I get my food, I'm okay. It's striving and just you can't compress it. Like it's not, don't be the fucking worm.
Yeah.
Be better.
And height and verticality, like, and then mastery and like, well, why why mastery? Like, why are we placing ourselves in this role where the other is higher than us on this like totem pole? And I think he actually has like a pretty fleshed out system of like why it matters. And I think that has to do with the fact that we are these Cartesian subjects, and we are kind of like floating in the void, and we could very well be brains in jars, or God could very well be an evil genius. And because we are these Cartesian subjects, but because we find ourselves in this undeniable situation of having this interiority and having this human capacity for enjoyment and for suffering and this and that, like, that's all true. It doesn't matter if it's cosmically true, or it doesn't matter. We find ourselves all already here. We can't deny it. We can't change it. And because that is the case, like, what affirms that, or what gives us like the ability to act in the world in this ethical way is the relationship to the other. And like it goes back to like confirmation of, am I crazy? Are you seeing this? Or like, did I do a good job? Like, you don't go to a child and say and ask for like confirmation of your world and your point of view and your perspective. You go to someone like a teacher. You go to someone like a master, someone who's mastered the kind of craft or whatever. So like already the other is in this position of verticality, because you're seeking approval, you're seeking affirmation, confirmation. You're seeking to be welcomed into something. Like, you do all those things to a master. You don't do that to a student or a pupil. So like that, I think, is where verticality first comes in. And then from there, it just kind of opened up a way to see the world where he's like, oh, mastery and excellence and intensity and all this shit is real, and it matters, and it's what gives human subjectivity substance in the first place. And so it kind of becomes just, he says it, ethics isn't optics. Like it becomes a lens that helps him see what matters to him, which is kind of human subjectivity, humanness.
I have a quote I wanted to read that Levinas says that I got from that book that I think relates. The book is The Face of Things.
Yeah.
And the quote starts, as Levinas says, the other is the richest and the poorest of beings. The richest at an ethical level, in that it always comes before me. The poorest at an ontological or political level, in that without me it can do nothing. It is utterly vulnerable and exposed. And I feel like that is kind of saying it right there when we were talking about how like the other is better than you in the sense, like the master, but it's also poorer in the sense that it's also an I in their context. And
that's it. And it's not one-to-one reversible, but it is reciprocal in a complex, emergent, like, because I recognize your capacity to be a human, that's what allows me to be a human. And so we can both be humans together, and let's hold hands and go skip through the meadow in the clearing. So it's like, in a weird way, it almost is predicated on simultaneous like height and lowness, because it's the capacity. Like, it's this capacity in the other is what, like, they're human. Oh my God, other people are people too. Like, and once you have that realization, it allows you to be a people. Like, before you encounter that, before you act that way, you're not a real people. You are an object. You're a fucking stooge. You're a mannequin walking through the world, consuming, producing, wasting, slowly dying. But when you encounter this infinity, And when you recognize it in the other and you can enter into this ethical relation with enthusiastic consent, like that's what allows you to stop being the worm and become the human centipede. Like that's
it can't
it.
be done alone.
Can't be done alone. Right. And yeah, dude. Well, and that too. That's why it's like, dude, that's super Heideggerian. Like even though Heidegger kind of goes into this like instrumental destiny worship shit. Well, I mean, even that, like even his idea of destiny is predicated on others. Like it's always being there with others.
I think that's the formula for the whole gist of it. And it's just finding like the little webs he's weaving that go back and forth to each other, or side paths.
Yeah.
I have a little bit more in me, but the need of hunger is setting in. Has set in, yet I am responding by saying, maybe there's
Insidious.
more than this hunger.
Yeah, man. You're not being enslaved to it, and you will enjoy when you eat later, you will enjoy it. You're not just saying like, "Oh, I'm hungry now, I got to go eat." You're saying, "I am currently involved in something. I'm currently laboring. I don't know about labor. I'm currently like acting."
I'm emotionally laboring right now.
Yeah.
These jackasses.
But it's like you're involved in constructive, you're involved in a project. You're involved ethically with others in a constructive project. And you're choosing to give that priority over the satisfaction of these animal needs because you're a human. You're not just an animal. And I think, to go all the way back around, I think that's what's going on here in section 4, subsection 4. Like he's just saying like, no, we have needs and they need to be satisfied. But there's more to it than that. Like we can also have enjoyment that comes along with the satisfaction. Because you also have a need. You have a need for hunger. That's like a base need. You have a higher need for communication, which, what does he say? Was it subsection 3 when he talks about it's not the culmination of the function, but like it's the act in like engaging in it. So you have a need for communication, communion, understanding. These are also needs. And so you're pursuing these needs right now. And they're needs that you understand won't be sated. And that's why they have, or that's why they can have priority over these animal needs. That's just like, oh, hungry, food, poop, sleep. Like, no, like this is like ethical involvement. This is your desire, your proper Levinasian desire, the infinite phallus. And later we'll all go scratch the itch. You know, we'll do whatever. We'll chase the pediogia, and then we'll come back around and be proper metaphysicians once again. It's a balancing act. We're never totally one nor the other.
Something interesting, since we're bringing in the Lacan terms again, is when Levinas does talk about like how we bring something to our needs that are not just the needs themselves. I just kept thinking of like, oh yeah, that's basically like the object cause of desire kind of idea of um it's like our particular desire of how something becomes attractive to us, right? The objet petit a filters all the other stuff so
Yeah.
that then we have like, oh, I want that hammer to
Yep.
use, or I want that specific food. It's like I could just eat any other food. That would be the needs being met. But like sometimes you're just like, no, but I have a hankering for this one specific food. And that can override uh m a lot of just the basic survival needs. It's
Dude,
like the desires overflowing that capacity to make that more rational decision, that animal decision. You go kind of like beyond animal, you know?
so this way to talk enjoyment, desire, Levinas's enjoyment, desire, this and that, also accounts for drive in this way that, like, earlier today I told my partner I want Taco Bell, and she said, you want diarrhea? Like, that was her only response. And I was like, well, that's true, but that doesn't change the fact that I want Taco Bell. And diarrhea is an objectively negative thing. No one likes to have diarrhea. You know, diarrhea is a harm that I would be doing to myself by indulging in this desire for Taco Bell. But for whatever reason, my desire latches on to Taco Bell. Is it the plastic tortillas? Is it the tangy ground beef? I don't know what it is, but it is that flaw that allows that particular fantasy to kind of carry me away, and it actually becomes drive in that sense. Like, I know I'm going to have diarrhea later. I still want Taco Bell. It's self-undermining in this way.
Was it a thing where you wanted a specific thing also from Taco Bell? Like it couldn't
Soft
just be
taco,
anything on the menu. It had to be this specific thing.
just a regular soft taco with the fire sauce. That's it. It's nothing special.
Diet Baja Blast.
Do they still make Baja Blast?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I thought they stopped making it.
No, you can get it in. I don't do it, but you can get it in like cans and stuff too. I used to
Dude.
mix it with vodka all the time.
Oh.
Yeah. Talk about
I feel
having that
bad for
need
you.
that isn't good for you.
I
And
feel
that
bad
led
for
to
you,
a
dude.
lot of the D word.
Yeah. That's just a bad morning in a bottle right there, dude.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Well, I
Well,
was just think of your example. It's like we can
but no,
want
that's
things
yeah.
and crave things that are
There's so much in Lacan, because Lacan did a fantastic job describing the way our libidinal economy works. There's so much there that I think fits right into Levinas. And I think not the only, but the main maybe crux is just being able to see metaphysical desire as this infinite positivity, and our fascination or our curiosity, if you want to be Heideggerian, like we get carried away in the curiosity of the world, of the sensuous world, and then libidinal economy starts working this way because it does work this way. But yeah, I think it's probably dangerous to talk Levinas and Lacan at the same time. But I think we can actually benefit from it. I think, as long as we're careful.
Here's actually a distinction I found that I don't think Lacan would ever say. And it's on page 115, kind of in the middle. To despair of life makes sense only because originally life is happiness. Suffering is a failing of happiness. It is not correct to say that happiness is an absence of suffering. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a bold statement. It's basically saying, well, actually, life is all like goodness, or like, yeah, it is happiness. And then yeah, suffering could come about, but it's not because well, happiness is not the absence of suffering. It is the failing of happiness. But like Lacan would never really say like, oh yeah, the base level of our subjectivity is that we have happiness and then it gets frustrated or something. He
Yeah.
would say, no, we start off
Life is
we're
pain.
our basis is, yeah, life is suffering, almost like that Buddhist
Yep.
kind of tenet, right? Life is suffering. Um and we find happiness by tapping into our drive and like the back and forth of the drive and the pleasure,
Hmm.
um and that kind of relationship that happens. So yeah, it is important though to like make the distinctions
Yes.
between Levinas and Lacan when you can spot them.
Yep.
And so Levinas is kind of just like, yeah, metaphysics is relationships.
Yeah.
Happiness, life is happiness. It's like, whoa, okay. Uh,
it's it's
he's not black pilled,
I think
but he's radical pilled.
I think yeah, I definitely think something's going on, and just saying it radical because he's also not white pilled. Like I don't think, I mean, Jesus Christ, he was in a concentration camp. Like Jesus, the hell that he lived through. He can't be a blissful optimist, you know, going through the world like, oh, you know, life is happiness. Like he's like, no, I've been to hell, and I'm here to tell you, despite hell, life is happiness. And I think that's fucking amazing. Now, if someone on TikTok or LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever wants to tell me life is happiness, I'm gonna tell them to go fuck themselves. But if someone who has really tarried with the horrors that we are capable of turns around and says, actually, all this suffering is just an insufficient mode of happiness. This happiness is at the fucking ground floor, and in fact, it's in the basement too. I'm gonna listen. And it's also, I mean, that's Heideggerian. Like Heidegger, like even when you don't care about a thing, like that's just an insufficient mode of care. Like our subjectivity is grounded in care, and which like that's our connection to. Maybe Heidegger goes in this functionalist way where he's like, you care about it because it you know aids in your survival or whatever. But Heidegger isn't just doing that, especially like Christopher said, later Heidegger, like you always care, and even when you don't care, it's in reference to the fact that you still care. It's just an insufficient mode of care. And yeah, I love how suffering is this failure of happiness. It's not the privation. It's not the absence of happiness. It's broken. Which to then take this to political economy, Levinas is like, there's something standing in the way. There's something causing the failure of us being able to have this happiness. Something that leads to war and hell and the horrors that he saw firsthand and lived through. Which is like that's why I think this is super duper anti-capital, because he's saying like, no, motherfuckers, there's more to life than, you know, these material conditions and material pursuits and material pleasure and material suffering. There's more going on. There's something prior to that. And that's why he calls ethics, the ethical relation is metaphysics, because everyone with their ontology and their science and their understanding of everything, they're like, we have figured everything out. We did ontology and that we got to the bottom of things, and they were fucking Nazis. So Levinas is like, actually, dude, you're still doing metaphysics. There's something you still missed out on, which is why he goes back to Descartes and posits this ethical relation, because he sees where this very science-friendly ontological way of thinking, like, let me think about things and the proper like qualities and characteristics of things and how can we put things to use and what is their function and this and that. Like Levinas is like, dude, that's how we get hell on earth. We need to re-inject some of the wishy-washy, soft and squishy humanness, because we're all always already here. And it's undeniable, and you can't run from the fact that my actions affect you in an either positive or negative or neutral way. Everything we do, it's not just like the material consequences of our actions, but there's this human content. There's this interior content that accompanies everything we do in the world.
It's very existential in that capacity.
Yeah.
I think, which is funny because a lot of people don't put him as an existentialist, but as I'm reading it and what you're saying to me, that's that ethical, the existentialist, like you're in a world with other people, everything you do matters in the greater scheme of things and affects others.
And the reason it matters, and the reason it should matter to you, is because those others, because of the effects on those others. Because yeah, we live in a society, like, you're just a brain in a jar. Without the other, you're worse off than Robinson Crusoe. Like, you have nothing. There is no world for you without the other. And when you treat them as objects and instruments, we get hell on earth.
Literally.
Yeah. We are close to the end of this section. I think if we're disciplined, I think we could probably finish the section and then discuss a little bit before everybody has to go. Okay. Section 5.
Sorry.
Section 5, affectivity as the ipseity of the I. We are catching sight of a possibility of rendering the unicity of the I intelligible. The unicity of the I conveys separation. Separation, in the strictest sense, is solitude and enjoyment. Happiness, or unhappiness, is isolation itself. The I is not unique like the Eiffel Tower or the Mona Lisa. The unicity of the I does not merely consist in being found in one sample only, but in existing without having a genus, without being the individuation of a concept. The ipseity of the I consists in remaining outside the distinction between the individual and the general. The refusal of the concept is not a resistance to generalization by the Greek word, which is on the same plane of the concept, and by which the concept is defined as by an antithetical term. Here, the refusal of the concept is not only one of the aspects of its being, but its whole content. It is interiority. This refusal of the concept drives the being that refuses it into the dimension of interiority. It is at home with itself. The I is thus the mode in which the breakup of totality, which leads to the presence of the absolutely other, is concretely accomplished. It is solitude par excellence. The secrecy of the I guarantees the discretion of the totality. This logically absurd structure of unicity, this non-participation in genus, is the very egoism of happiness. Happiness, in its relation with the other of nutriments, suffices to itself. It even suffices to itself because of this relation with the other. It consists in satisfying its needs and not in suppressing them. Happiness suffices to itself through the not sufficing to oneself proper to need. The lack in enjoyment, which Plato denounced, does not compromise the instant of sufficiency. The opposition between the ephemeral and the eternal does not convey the true meaning of sufficiency, which is the very contraction of the ego. It is an existence for itself, but not initially in view of its own existence, nor is it a representation of self by self. It is for itself, as in the expression, each for himself, for itself as the famished stomach that has no ears, capable of killing for a crust of bread, is for itself as the sure-footed one who does not understand the starving and approaches him as an alien species, as the philanthropist approaches the destitute. Damn. The self-sufficiency of enjoying measures the egoism or the ipseity of the ego and the same. Enjoyment is a withdrawal into oneself, an involution. What is termed an affective state does not have the dull monotony of a state, but is a vibrant exaltation in which dawns the self. For the I is not the support of enjoyment. The intentional structure is here wholly different. The I is the very contraction of sentiment, the pole of a spiral whose coiling and involution is drawn by enjoyment. The focus of the curve is a part of the curve. It is precisely as a coiling, as a movement toward oneself, that enjoyment comes into play. And now, one can understand in what sense we were able to say above that the I is an apology. Whatever be the transfigurations this egoism will receive from speech, it is for the happiness constitutive of its very egoism that the I who speaks pleads.
The breach of the totality that is accomplished by the enjoyment of solitude, or the solitude of enjoyment, is radical. When the critical presence of the other will call in question its egoism, it will not destroy its solitude. Solitude will be recognized in the concern for knowing, which is formulated as a problem of origin, inconceivable in a totality. To this problem, the notion of causality can bring no solution, since it is precisely a question of the self, of being absolutely isolated, whose isolation causality would compromise by reinstating it in a series. The notion of creation alone will be commensurate with such a question, respecting at the same time the absolute novelty of the I and its attachment to a principle, it having been called in question. The solitude of the subject will be recognized also in the goodness in which the apology issues. The upsurge of the self beginning in enjoyment, where the substantiality of the I is perceived not as the subject of the verb to be, but as implicated in happiness, not belonging to ontology, but to axiology, is the exaltation of the existent as such. The existent would then not be justicable to the comprehension of being or ontology. One becomes a subject of being not by assuming being, but enjoying happiness, by the interiorization of enjoyment, which is also an exaltation and above being. The existent is autonomous with respect to being. It designates not a participation in being, but happiness. The existent par excellence is man. When the I is identified with reason, taken as the power of thematization and objectification, it loses its very ipseity. To represent to oneself is to empty oneself of one subjective substance and to insensibilize enjoyment. By imagining this Anastasia, limitless Spinoza conjures away separation. But the joy of this intellectual coincidence and the freedom of this obedience marks a cleavage line in the unity of one in this way. Reason makes human society possible, but a society whose members would be only reasons would vanish. So I'm going to read that sentence again. But the joy of this intellectual coincidence and the freedom of this obedience marks a cleavage line in the unity of one in this way. Reason makes human society possible, but a society whose members would be only reasons would vanish as a society. What could a being entirely rational speak of with another entirely rational being? Reason has no plural. How could numerous reasons be distinguished? How could the Kantian kingdom of ends be possible had not the rational beings that comprise it retained as the principle of individuation, their exigency for happiness, miraculously saved from the shipwreck of sensible nature. In Kant, the eyes met again in this need for happiness. I'll just finish real quick. To be I is to exist in such a way as to be already beyond being in happiness. For the I to be means neither to oppose nor to represent something to itself, nor to use something, nor to aspire to something, but to enjoy something.
All right, I'll close us out. 6. The eye of enjoyment is neither biological nor sociological. Individuation through happiness individuates a concept whose comprehension and extension coincide. The individuation of the concept by self-identification constitutes the content of this concept. The notion of the separated person, which we have approached in the description of enjoyment, which is posited in the independence of happiness, is to be distinguished from the notion of person such as it is fabricated by the philosophy of life or of race. In the exaltation of biological life, the person arises as a product of the species or of impersonal life, which has recourse to the individual so as to ensure its impersonal triumph. The unicity of the I, its status as a conceptless individual, would disappear in this participation in what exceeds it. The pathos of liberalism, which we rejoin on one side, lies in the promotion of a person inasmuch as he represents nothing further, that is precisely a self. Then multiplicity can be produced only if the individuals retain their secrecy, if the relation that unites them into a multiplicity is not visible from the outside, but proceeds from one unto the other. If it were entirely visible from the outside, if the exterior point of view would open upon its ultimate reality, the multiplicity would form a totality in which the individuals would participate. The bond between persons would not have preserved the multiplicity from addition. In order that multiplicity be maintained, the relation proceeding from me to the other, the attitude of one person with regard to another, must be stronger than the formal signification of conjunction, to which every relation risks being degraded. This greater force is concretely affirmed in the fact that the relation proceeding from me to the other cannot be included within a network of relations visible to a third party. If this bond between me and the other could be entirely apprehended from the outside, it would suppress, under the gaze that encompassed it, the very multiplicity bound within this bond. The individuals would appear as participants in the totality. The other would amount to a second copy of the I, both included in the same concept. Pluralism is not a numerical multiplicity. In order that a pluralism in itself, which cannot be reflected in formal logic, be realized, there must be produced in depth the movement from me to the other, an attitude of an I with regard to the other, an attitude already specified as love or hatred, obedience or command, learning or teaching, etc. That would not be a species of relationship in general. This means that the movement from me to the other could not present itself as a theme to an objective gaze, freed from this confrontation with the other, to a reflection. Pluralism implies a radical alterity of the other, whom I do not simply conceive by relation to myself, but confront out of my egoism. The alterity of the other is in him and is not relative to me. It reveals itself. But I have access to it proceeding from myself, and not through a comparison of myself with the other. I have access to the alterity of the other from the society I maintain with him, and not by quitting this relation in order to reflect on its terms. Sexuality supplies the example of this relation, accomplished before being reflected on. The other sex is an alterity born by a being as an essence, and not as the reverse of his identity. But it could not affect an unsexed me. The other, as master, can also serve us as an example of an alterity that is not only by relation to me, an alterity that, belonging to the essence of the other, is nevertheless visible only from an eye. Cool, and that was all of section B of section 2.
Yeah.
Oh wait, section A.
Section
Section
A.
2.
Subsection A. Section 2, subsection A.
Yes.
I just want to say real quick, I liked on this last page because I felt like he did this earlier too, where he's just dunking on kind of analytical philosophy when he's just saying like, yeah, this isn't shown in formal logic, but if you open your eyes and actually look, you can see what's happening. Just thought that was funny.
Yeah, man, I wonder if there's like beefs that, like, I don't know, dude, like, cuz like infinity, and he's like, infinity is this thing that you can kind of comprehend, but also it's like unintelligible at the same time, and it's just this thing. I don't know, like I feel like there are probably some analytic people who fucking hate Levinas, but I don't know that. I'm just like, I'm projecting. But this whole last part is doing this like math sucks thing. He's where he is like, no, this is not an equation. It's not that we are participants in a coherent whole, but that we are ethical actors in this like anarchic tapestry of infinities. So it can't be conceived as a whole. Like to conceive of society as society, this thing that can be understood and easily like instrumentalized and grappled with. Levinas was like, no, man, it's an anarchy of infinities, and the only way to like make it out alive is to take up this ethical stance and to seek out this ethical relation. I feel like Foundation, which is maybe my favorite science fiction series, maybe not. Here we go again on the science fiction talk, right? I feel like,
Who's it by?
Asimov. Isaac Asimov.
Thank you.
The dude who wrote The Robot, the three laws of robotics, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, Foundation it might be my favorite series. Books, anyway. Maybe not, but it's definitely in my top 3. Top 5. Top 3. Anyway, this is fucking stupid. In Foundation, there are essentially space Marxists who basically save the galaxy from itself. There's this guy, Harry Seldon, and he creates a science called psychohistory, which it's interesting because it's very close to like cliometrics, which is like sociology, economics, behaviorism. Basically, I mean, it kind of is just critique of political economy, really. If you get down to it, it's like optimistic Marxism saving the galaxy, and I love it. It's fucking great. It's a million times better than Dune, although Dune is another one that's great. That it's in my top 5 favorite series. But Foundation is way better. But anyway, in it, the main character and all the good guys and everyone who is like saving the galaxy are psychohistorians. And psychohistory treats society as a totality that can be taken in and understood. And while I think you can get really far when you're doing that, like Cleometrics is a really interesting, like it's actually interesting. You can almost predict people's behavior, but not as individuals, as participants of society at large. So statistics and like all this stuff. But Levinas is like, yeah, that works and it's functional. But it's missing the point. And like the march of history, like we spent all of history, or at least all of modernity, kind of viewing society as this total thing, and that like trying to manage it and trying to predict it and trying to improve it. And it gave us fucking fascism. It gave us, again, the concentration camps. And Levinas is like, we have to stop thinking this way. We have to stop thinking mathematically and allow this ethical relation to be what really counts, instead of just like predictable behavior, consumer patterns, and like demographics and blah, 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 this and that. Like, yeah, it works.
Sociological laws.
Yeah, it works. Functionally, it gets you a long way down the road, but like it's kind of a dead end. And I think that's what Levinas is saying, but that's what I thought of like when he's talking about participants in the totality. I was like, oh shit. That's like
I like that.
punching a hole in Marxism. I don't know.
I think he's against anything that totalizes.
Mm-hmm.
Like him dunking on Spinoza and like even Kant in that aspect. So I think that's maybe his dunk on Marx, as opposed to like what, because Marx and him I feel like are very similar. Like even like alienation in a sense
Mm-hmm.
could fit if you're not respecting the other in radical alterity. So I think it's just Levinas like hammering home the point you were just making, which is like, don't totalize or we're gonna be fucked up. We fucked up because of it. And all these philosophers who totalized too had to go back on what they were saying without even realizing it. This shit's beyond logic. It's beyond our biology. It's beyond our society. It just is because it is. And I'm showing you how it is. Open your eyes, open your hearts, and you'll see this.
Yeah.
Or you're gonna fucking kill somebody for a fucking crust of bread.
Yeah.
Which probably happened in front of him.
Yeah, dude.
Sorry, Cesar, please. This is a little side note, maybe before I get to my notes, that Nance, what you were talking about with the totalizing approach of these psychohistorians, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, it made me think of during the Ivan Illich course. Illich oftentimes he was very critical of anything that was trying to plan out well ahead, and believed that planning is like part of some kind of, not salvation, but it is the right thing to do, it is the right method to do is to plan things. And so yeah, his whole thing was like, well, um, I'm against that. And I think maybe for the similar reasons that Levinas would be like, uh, it can make sense of things and you can control things, but um is that really the human way of living? I think that's what Illich was kind of getting at. Um, Other people who might critique like uh things of like technology, automation, planning, all these things where you do have to at some point make quantifiable decisions. And Levinas is part of that camp of, well, I don't think it's quantity. Um, he's like one of the things that stood out to me in this reading um was in the section I was reading at, like around page 120 and 121. I'll go with the second page, 121. It's kind of at the top. If this bond between me and the other could be entirely apprehended from the outside, um, it would dot 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 until I underlined again. If this happened, if it could be seen from the outside, it would appear as participants in the totality. The other would amount to a second copy of the I. So what I'm interpreting that as meaning is that the relationship between an I and an other is singular. And if a third party could observe that and understand and apprehend it, I think is the word he used, then ultimately that would mean, oh, maybe this isn't as singular. Maybe we can extend this out to we understand all human relations now. We understand how this person relates to this person. Um, and So that was an interesting part is like, oh, if you did have this, the Levinas is saying, um, I don't think you can have a third party understand, like, let's say between like uh two people who are life partners, right? You can't really have that third person really understand, be in that relation between the two. They could have their own relation to each of those other people that are in the life partnership, but you can't be in between that relationship or observe it from the outside and understand it completely.
Yeah.
So it's like every one of your relationships is unique. That's kind of the what I took from that.
Yeah, and it's, I think, singular, like that every person is a singular person in this which in the next section he kind of critiques dialectics a little bit, maybe at least implicitly. um but like not talking about people as like particular versus universal or particular versus general, but like singular as in that, like entirely unique, cosmically unique. So the relations between these two singularities is itself again cosmically unique, and you can't I mean, again, you can get an inkling, you can get probably a fair way down the road to like sensing the nature of that relationship and the qualities and characteristics of that relationship, but you can never understand it. You can never totally understand it. And to totalize it and operationalize it, you're missing out. And again, ethics is an optics. Like Levinas is like, no, let's use this lens to see the world, because we know where modernity and liberalism, or like whatever you want to call it, we know where that gets us, where everyone is totalized and reduced down to this functional husband, wife, father, sibling, co-worker, neighbor, boss, representative, whatever. Like when you stand in these kind of like symbolic roles, we know where that takes us. But if we actually give the ethical relations themselves the space to like fill out the world itself, then maybe we won't have Holocaust Part 2. But I don't know. I don't think he ever explicitly says like I want to avoid Holocaust Part 2. Like I think he is just like, no, this is what we should be doing, because we know where we are right now. We know where like the status quo leads us. And there's this other thing that we're totally missing out on. The ethical relation and using ethics as the optics to see the world. So my relationship with my partner it's not like you could swap it and replace it with anyone else's relationship with their partner. My relationship to my kids can't be swapped out. You can't say generic father, generic child. It doesn't work. Like there's always singular facts and features and qualities and characteristics that really flesh out people in the world.
Yeah, it's interesting. Levinas, well, the word that gets used in this translation is copy, and like that instantly just makes me think of like Baudrillard, copies of copies
Yeah,
of
dude.
copy, and it's interesting to think how uh potentially we could be making copies of ourselves and thinking, okay, this now the world makes sense because I've allowed myself to be made into a copy of the other, or the other allowed themselves to be made into a copy of I, and that allows things to happen more functionally, right? But what happens if we allow that to happen to ourselves, right? To our relationships, our
Yeah, dude.
relating.
I'm reading the French right now to see if I can find that word. Oh, okay, a second example. So yeah, the specific word copy would amount to a second copy of the I.
And then also after that, I wasn't really sure what the word multiplicity means in this case. So if any of you could have a crack at that.
Da, da, da. If it were entirely visible from the outside, if the exterior point of view would open upon its ultimate reality, the multiplicity would form a totality in which the individuals would participate. I think he's just using it to distinguish like plurality is a way of organizing that would allow the ethical relation to take precedence as opposed to like the economic relations or whatever, whereas the multiplicity is this like very mathematic, instrumental, functional, like we live in a society, and because you are a dumbass worker, you will like this is what, and I am the smart boss, and they are the deserving people, and you are the lumpen pieces of shit. Like I think he's using that to like distinguish plurality from this idea of like liberal or modern multiplicity, I think.
It matches his language too, because he's talking about addition, multiplicity from addition. So he's just doing his math, like he's hammering that point home, is how I was reading it.
Yeah. Yeah, and you would just have multiple copies. Like multiplicity does imply that kind of like
It's like being a Borg.
Yeah. Whereas
To bring it back,
like plurality is the Federation. Plurality is like, no, we're going to come together in our differences and honor the differences. Whereas multiplicity is like, we are just multiple copies of the one.
you will be assimilated.
Yeah, dude. Resistance is
Pluralism
futile.
is not a numerical multiplicity.
Yeah, it like there is something with the language where like multiplicity, mathematics, multiplication, as opposed to plurality, like plural is a softer, more human word.
Mhm.
Multiple is this mathematic.
Like, rather be
Um,
in a plurality than a thruple.
fuck yeah.
Sorry.
I couldn't do a throuple, dude. I
Yeah.
am a jealous bitch. I'm jealous and insecure. I couldn't do it.
Same.
Section 5, affectivity is the ipseity of the I. Yeah, I think this is more more of this interiority, and like we can be animals and act like we don't have interiority and we don't have this higher content or affectivity, like your affect, how you're feeling, how you are experiencing. I think that section is just more of that.
And it's like our individualness is not just being like a single individual example of it. Like it's the eye is not unique like the Eiffel Tower or the Mona Lisa. It's just the fact that we exist independently and can become part of this relation in a sense, is how I was picking up. I know that was extremely vague how I explained it, but it's like we're not unique just because we're a single eye that like manifests itself that makes beautiful. It's just part of like the human condition and like substance of the relation.
Yeah, we're always already here.
Yeah. It's interior.
Yeah. And then reason, yeah, and then he's talking about reason and instrumental reason, that we are not we're not algorithms. We're not just algorithms. I mean, we have some aspects of us that are, I guess, algorithmic and functional and behavioral and all that. But also, there's more to us than that. I think, so to go back a little bit, where he's talking about the absolution, I was thinking along with Critchley, where Critchley, Dave said the other day, like Critchley said, the secret to understanding is like man is capable of absolving himself. Like it's not the fact that we're in this relation. Everything is in this relation. But what sets man apart is that he can absolve himself of the relation. And like the fact that we could absolve ourselves of that relation, but then we would be Robinson Crusoe. So like the fact that we have the potential to be self-standing and we can be these like radical individuals. But because we choose not to absolve ourselves and wash our hands of that relation, like that's when it becomes our responsibility. Then you're doing the meme, like, yeah, but we live in a society, but it's like, yeah, but no, but for real though. Like, yeah, seriously, we do live in a society. I don't know.
No, I agree with that because he was talking about later on towards the end of the reading, where it's like you could just be the philanthropist, just like, oh, donate money, but you're not really seeing the other. It's invisible. That's them absolving themselves of it, or me stealing. Like, I'm hungry right now. If I murdered Cesar and took his pizza, I'm exiting the relation.
Yeah.
So it's like he's saying you gotta be better, so to speak, and make that like authentic. That's where I'm saying I see like the existentialist in him a little bit, where it's like, or the Heideggerian, like authenticity and being with, being for others. It's just better expanded.
Yeah, dude. It's definitely the expansion pack for sure. And I'm glad we paid for it because this DLC is sick. The base game started to suck. Is that Peter Piper, Cesar?
Damn, you're a true Phoenician. You could just spot it from a Zoom call.
I was so confused. I was like, what the fuck are you talking about?
The pizza. Peter Piper is some of the best pizza in the world. It's not great. It's not like it's super good pizza. But because I grew up with it and it was like a special treat, I love Peter Piper. But yeah, that's what it looks like.
It's a multiplicity. It's a copy of a copy.
It is.
You know it when you see it.
Yeah. It's nothing but a fucking simulation.
The best pizza I had out here was in Arizona. It was near Glendale. I don't remember the name of it. I was like drunk as hell, and they put Big Ziti on top of it.
Big Ziti.
Yeah, I don't remember the name of the place though. I liked it. It was near Glendale, which was a terrible area where I was.
Hey, that's where I live.
Oh, just kidding.
No, I'm also just kidding.
Glendale, dude.
Glendale sucks.
Yeah.
It was super sketch.
We used to ride our skateboards and take the bus to Glendale to fight Nazis, dude. Because the Aryan Brotherhood, like, there's a huge like enclave of the AB in Glendale, and they were recruiting angry young teenagers, and like, so back then in the scene there was punk rockers and there were skinheads and sharps. I don't know if anyone watching, if you know what sharps are, they're skinheads against racial prejudice. I knew one of the founders of the movement, my homie Brian. He moved to Glendale from New York. But anyway, so we were like little working class radicals, right? And that's what we thought anyway. So the skinhead movement is kind of built on working class politics. So there was a few of us who we were skinheads, and we encountered the Nazi skins in Glendale, and so that was our little gang war beef bullshit. Was we would go fight them in Glendale, they would come down to Maryville and fight us. And yeah, Glendale sucks. Although, not to totalize, there's some dope shit in Glendale.
No, yeah, I'm sure. And but, like I said, the pizza I had there was phenomenal. I'm sure. And if you want to get cheap meth,
straight up, Sunny Slope, dude, 19th Avenue and not Northern, what? Peoria?
You
I-
gotta
it-
drop
Eh,
Levinas there,
Yeah,
like care
dude.
packages.
Yeah.
That's what you should have been doing with the skinheads.
Yeah, here,
Hey,
read this, bitch.
yeah. The name's German, I swear.
Yeah. He's Lithuanian. That's kind of close, right? You guys are dumb. You don't know.
Argentina, same thing.
Yeah. Damn, I was gonna say something.
I'm sorry.
No, it's my fault. I'm all loopy and
Don't go to
shit.
Glendale. Don't go to North Phoenix.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't go to Maryvale.
But
Don't go to
Arizona's cool as
Litchfield
shit
Park.
too, though. I almost moved there, and then I was like,
Look,
the
man.
heat. I'm a bitch when it comes to the heat.
I actually want to write a book with Cesar about
Hell yeah.
Phoenix and the Valley, like the metropolitan area, because I think it's unique. I think it's interesting, and I think in 15 years it'll be a memory. I think Phoenix will be a thing of the past. You know, before we know it. Like
You think before Las Vegas?
I do, because the population growth, like Vegas is in just as precarious a spot as Phoenix is as far as like water and resources. But the fact that Phoenix has been the fastest growing metropolitan area for like 15 years running, like that is just accelerating the collapse. And like the shit I'm going through now with just trying to move.
Yeah.
Like it's such a crazy process. Like you can't buy a house. If you want to rent a house, you're nothing but like cattle in a long line of other cattle. Like there's so many factors going on.
Multiplicity.
But yeah, it really is. It's very instrumental. It's very mathematic. But I am convinced that, I mean, we're already running out of water. Like Scottsdale stopped selling their water to some of the satellite towns of Scottsdale, and Scottsdale is basically North Phoenix. There's towns that don't have water. There's actual towns where people live. They don't have running water. They have to ship their water in from trucks from Gila Bend and Casa Grande and shit. Like they're like motherfucking people have no water. Now the people that live there.
Let's give $20 billion to Israel.
Oh yeah.
Sorry.
Well, and we sold all our water to Saudi Arabian investors. We could go on and on. I don't want to go on and on, but the people who live in those houses are rich assholes. So I don't feel bad for them because they can afford to move to a different city.
Yeah.
But I think within 10 years, there's going to be people who can't afford to move who are going to run out of water. It's already so expensive to cool your house. Like there's people that die every summer because they can't afford air conditioning.
So you guys should do it though. I think it'd be dope.
Yeah.
Like Land's book on
China?
Shanghai or China, yeah. But
dude, we could do such a dope ass theory book, like using Phoenix as like the framing for like societal collapse and economic collapse and cultural
the
collapse.
frontier.
We are on the frontier. We really are.
you could
But-
do the
Of
audible
something that
too.
people don't want in their cities.
You don't want that smoke, but it's coming. It's coming to a city near you. Everybody, if you are on the internet, which you necessarily would be if you're hearing this right now, your city, your town, your municipality, your village,
Province.
whatever, your province, it's doomed
Father.
unless shit changes. And I don't know, like we could continue to do the politics, red team, blue team, blame it on the other people, or we could actually like pump the brakes a little bit, try to figure something else out. And maybe, just maybe, try to encounter the other and see them and have this face-to-face relation so that all of our politics doesn't just become the zero-sum blame game. And we can actually think about like, how do I improve my life without encroaching on their life and vice versa. So all that said, fuck politics. Don't vote. The world is ending. You suck. No, that's not true.
Yeah. Go to Theory Underground or fucking
Yeah.
your library.
Yeah.
Fucking start reading some books and film yourself reading.
Actually,
Get some
no.
Peter
Legitimately.
Pipers or whatever.
Try something new. Like instead of doing the same shit and going on Reddit and arguing with someone, or Twitter or fucking whatever, go to the fucking library. Pick up a book. Strike up a conversation. Ask for interpretation, ask for feedback. Try something new, because just like Levinas, we see where all this shit gets us, and it's not fucking good. We're approaching Hell on Earth Part 2.
Electric Boogaloo.
Fucking A. And all that said, I'm gonna end the stream and then we'll get